This is a story about Sean and a leprechaun. Hello, my name is June Foray. Now, before I begin my story, I want to tell you something about St. Patrick. He was the patron saint of Ireland, and he lived over 1,400 years ago. He was supposed to have driven all the snakes from Ireland, so every March 17th, all the Irish people honor St. Patrick by wearing green shamrocks, which you know are little flowers that look like our own four-leaf clover, except that they only have 3 leaves. Here's a little poem that the boys and girls sing. Upon the top of a tall green hill, St. Patrick preached a sermon. He drove the frogs into the bogs and banished all the vermin. But now, after all that introduction, here's the story. It was a shiny, bright morning in a small village in Ireland. "Father," said Sean early in the day, after he had hoed all the rows of beans, "Father, it's been a long time since I've seen the likes of Timothy Malone. Would you be letting me visit him today?" Mr. O'Day straightened himself and leaned on his hoe. "Sean, me boy, sure you've turned a row of beans better than your old father. Run along with yourself and give me best wishes to Mrs. Malone. Be sure to be home for supper." And Mr. O'Day went back to his work. As Sean skipped off down the field, he heard his father call, "Be careful you don't step in the fairy ring on your way. You've got a light foot, and the little people will keep you dancing once they get to you." Sean felt the piece of coal his granny had given him, so that the good little people would take care of him and guard him against all harm, and he felt safe. He spent the whole day with Timothy, romping with Colleen, Tim's dog, and just before Sean went home, Mrs. Malone said, "Sure, and we'll have a bit of a feast over your coming here, Sean, me boy. While I'm throwing the cake together, do you get some potatoes from the bag and put them down in the ashes. You, Tim, stir up the fire a bit and keep the kettle full. Sure, it's singing like a bird this instant. Oh, and shut up the hens for me." By the time the tasks were through, the potatoes were baked, the tea brewed, and the cakes all done to a warm brown. "Indeed, ma'am, it's a fine cook that you are," said Sean after he finished his last buttered potatoes. "And it's home I must be going before it gets dark. And if it's a leprechaun you be finding on your way home, be careful you keep your eyes on him when you catch him." "A leprechaun?" asked Sean, puzzled. "Pray, what may that be?" "Oh, and the saints preserve us. It's leprechauns you never heard of. Little men, they're smaller than the smallest baby you've ever laid your eyes on. Long beards they have, and little pointed caps on the heads of them. And it's forever making little shoes they are, and you can hear the tap-tap of their hammers before you ever get a sight of them at all. And the gold and the silver and the precious stones they have hidden away would fill the world with treasure." "And they do say," piped in Timothy, "that if you catch one on your 2 hands and you never take your eyes off him, you can make him give up his money." "Well, that's easy then," said Sean. "All you have to do is catch one and just keep looking at him all the time. Faith, it ought to be simple to get the riches away." "Oh, but they have tricks of the world to make you look the other way, the leprechauns have," said Mrs. Malone. "And then when you look back, they slip out of your fingers like they was made of fog or smoke." "Did you ever catch one, Mrs. Malone?" "Oh, heavens no, but just let me. I'd get his riches off in him." "Well, I have to go home, Mrs. Malone. It'll be dark pretty soon. Sure, Granny and Father'll be worrying about me. Thank you for a wonderful day, and goodbye, Timothy." All the way home, Sean kept thinking about the leprechauns. What a grand idea it would be to catch them for a living. And once you knew how to catch them and keep your eyes on them, why, it was possible to get rich in hardly any time at all. Oh, what fun it would be to catch one. Sean could get new jeans and shoes. He could buy Granny a new bonnet and Dad a new hoe. "I guess I'll catch leprechauns for a living." When he reached home, he saw a dark figure hurrying down the road, and Granny's voice called to him,
Is it yourself, Sean? And whatever kept you to this hour? Sure, and with your being late, and with Mr. McQueen raising the rent, your father sits in the room as sad as can be.
Sean's father sat by the chimney with his feet up, smoking his pipe. Sean explained that he was a little longer because Mrs. Malone had been telling stories, and they had forgotten all about the time. Then Mr. O'Day settled back in his chair sadly. "Oh, indeed it'll be a sorrowful St. Patrick's Day for us, son, sure. Sure it'll be moving that we have to be doing next week. It's another £1 that we have to pay on our rent." It was a sorrowful little Irish boy who went to his little bed on the other side of the kitchen, and Granny put out the candle and covered the coals in the fireplace. All night, Sean tossed restlessly on his bed of straw and linen, dreaming about the evil face of the landlord. And what else do you think? About the leprechauns. The next morning when Sean awoke, the sun was shining through the little square window and lay in a patch of bright yellow on the floor. And he muttered to himself, "Is it today or tomorrow? I don't know. Well, it isn't yesterday anyway." And then he thought about Mr. McQueen and the rent. What would his poor father do? They had lived there for so long that they didn't want to move. His breakfast of potatoes, bread, and milk was finished, and he walked out in the fields among the bean rows. The bees were buzzing, and the birds were chirping and hopping, and the butterflies were flying about. Everything smelled as fresh and sweet as if it were the first day of the world. All of a sudden, what did he hear among the bean rows but a noise that went tick, 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 tick. It sounded as if a shoemaker were putting on the heel of a shoe. Sean stood still and listened. Still that sound. Tick, 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 tick. It sounded just as if it were coming from the third row of beans under the biggest stalk. Sean tiptoed over and bent down. And bless me, if he didn't see before him a bit of an old man with a cocked hat on his head and a pipe in his mouth, smoking away. He had a bright-colored green coat with big brass buttons and a pair of silver buckles on his shoes, and he was working away as hard as ever he could on another pair of shoes. As soon as Sean saw him, he knew him to be a leprechaun. God save you, honest man. That's a hard day's work you're at this hot day." And he ran at him and caught him in his two hands. "Where's your gold and silver?" "Money? Where on top of the earth would I get money?" "Well, maybe not on top of the earth, but in it. And if you don't give me your purse this instant, I'll twist your nose as quick as a wink." The little man's eyes popped out with fright, and he cried with terror, "Come with me a couple of fields off, and I'll show you where I keep me money." Sean remembered what Mrs. Malone said, and he kept his two eyes on him without winking, and he held him fast. The little man showed him where to go, and there, sure enough, in the corner of the field, in a deep hole, was a pile of shiny gold pieces. Sean knelt down, still keeping his eyes on the little fellow, and filled his pockets with the gold until they were bulging. Then he let go of the little man, who disappeared completely. Sean felt his pockets to make sure that the gold was still there, and it was. He hurried home and told his father and Granny what had happened. They refused to believe him. Then he emptied his pockets of all the gold, and you can imagine the joy of the O'Day family. The wicked old Mr. McQueen got his rent, Daddy got his new hoe, and Granny got a beautiful bonnet. But however hard Sean looked for his leprechaun, after that day, he never found another one. Some people say that the little elves knew that the O'Day family was in need, and so the tiny man had let himself be caught on purpose. And Sean was the happiest little boy in Ireland on St. Patrick's Day.